All right, guys, it is Josh here talking to Devin Kelley. Devin Kelley's a practitioner I've been following online for at least a couple of years now, and quite frankly, someone that inspires me. We're going to be having a quick little chat, going over a bunch of stuff that selfishly I am very interested in understanding and knowing, and we're going to be sharing that with you guys today, and hopefully someone will have some benefit from hearing some of these questions. So, Devin, how you doing?
Hey, bro. Good. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate the chance to have this chat. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Devin Kelley, guys, has competed in collegiate level track, studied and taught yoga extensively. He's delved deep into many movement practices, bodyweight training extraordinaire, has researched and taught many mobility and movement practices, and has had his fair share of barbell training. Hopefully, I summed that up kind of okay, but for the audience listening, how does all of this kind of link together? Like, who is Devin Kelley?
Hmm. It strikes me that the human memory is very faulty. You know, it's imperfect. So I look back on my athletic career and my research and my training and my coaching, and it's all kind of jumbled up. You know, I can't really keep events straight for the most part. Um, and so, you know, like when I think about my identity at the moment as a coach and as an athlete, it's kind of an amalgamation of all these jumbled memories, and they follow a rough sequence, but for the most part, I don't really think of it separately. You know, it's like it's like being in a place. I think when you think of that place, you don't think of like, I mean, there are separate landmarks, of course, that you remember about that place, but mostly what you remember is a general feeling. You know, the smells combine with the sounds, combine with the landscape, combine with the landmarks, and you kind of have this feeling in your heart about the sound. I think that's a lot about like what identity is. And so when I think of myself as like a practitioner and coach, I don't really think about the separate pieces. I think about what it feels like to be me as a coach, you know, as a mindset, I suppose. And I guess that mindset is really, it's characterized by wanting to learn as much as possible about being myself, about being a human and fulfilling different roles in my life. You know, what it's like to be a good partner, what it's like to be a good practitioner, what it's like to be a good mm, athlete, performer, what it's like to be a good student. Yeah, I don't know. So for me, training as a modality has always been a means to learn something about the human experience. And yeah, though I have gone through phases in my life, like you mentioned, collegiate track, for example, where I was focused on more or less quantitative goals, like you just want to run fast. That's it. You know, you're trying to best yourself in terms of time, and that's the singular goal when you're a track athlete. For the most part, for most people, um, I would characterize those goals as very nearsighted. And this will perhaps answer another question that I saw on the list. If I can jump ahead, is like, you know, like if you know, if I could tell myself anything, if I went back in time as a former practitioner, a former athlete, it would probably be that. You know, just like I was so focused on quantitative goals at a certain point in my life. I really wanted to, I wanted to be the best that I could, run the fastest that I could in the 800 meters, which is not a bad thing to have that goal, but I would have held it more lightly in my hand. And I think I would have focused on more human existential goals first, you know?
Okay, cool. So, despite whether you're teaching or studying yoga or, bodyweight training, barbell training, running, you're using all of these as a means to understand who Devin Kelley is,
Mm.
understanding who you are and learning more about yourself. So whether you're teaching or learning yoga or whether you're practicing BJJ, it's all kind of in the same of this sphere of learning about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I would characterize it that way. And even that still doesn't really seem to sum it up, you know, in terms of the feeling of it. Because there are smaller finite goals that like I say, I try to hold lightly in my hand at the same time. which is like learning about, for example, the development process in different spheres. Like, what is strength development? What
Hmm.
is speed development? What is, what is agility and um, complexity of thinking in terms of, movement complexity, and in terms of, but, so all of these things I'm concerned with, of course, but there's definitely a deeper existential layer to what I'm trying to do in any given session, you know.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I think a lot of people that I might ask that question to would be like, yeah, I like to train. There's, something that's really cool. That's rad. So, you're in Bali right now. I know you've been in China and, maybe various places in the US. So what led you abroad for training and teaching and learning and, as opposed to maybe just staying in the US or, taking a more traditional path? What led you abroad?
I wanted to push my own buttons, I think. Yeah.
I
I
like that.
um I was I can see, observing myself from, a hawk's eye view, so to speak, that I tend toward habits, patterns, like very predictable sort of routines, and I thrive like that. It's how I get a lot done, being very regular and consistent, and having a very structured approach to my daily life. And I'm very good at that. And I noticed that I noticed my tendency to stay in those sort of very uh, habitual patterns. Um, and I don't know where it came from. I guess just my gut. I got this sense that I was holding myself back in some way. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time, and I got an offer. I had already been planning to go abroad. I was actually planning to go to Japan first, and I didn't know how I was going to get there or what was going to bring me there. And then so I slowly kind of fell into the yoga teaching tradition. And then as I became more known on social media at that point, maybe I had just like maybe like 8 or 9 thousand followers. I got contacted by a company in Shanghai, China, and they said, "Hey, you want to come over to our studio and talk about working full time?" And I didn't really know what that meant, so I was like, let's do a trial run. So I flew over there on a trial run for a few weeks just to see what it was like to teach there and to see if I wanted the full-time gig. Anyway, long story short, I ended up taking the full-time gig. And yeah, so like I knew that traveling alone, by myself, also slightly unprepared, I didn't really have any money at the time. I had to sell my camera lenses to even afford the flight ticket. Um, you know, so I knew that it was going to be uncomfortable. I knew it was going to push me, and that's what I wanted. And so I stayed in Shanghai for like 9 months or so, and then started traveling a lot. And eventually, by the year mark, I was traveling full time, living out of my backpack. I did that for like a year and a half, which, as you can imagine, is quite contrary to my natural tendency to just want to stay in one place and have a routine. So I learned a lot doing that. I got what I wanted, I suppose, more than I asked for, in fact.
Yeah, I'm a very routine person, just like you. So maybe I can learn something from that, making myself a little uncomfortable. That's gold, man. That's really cool. I like that. Just to know something about yourself and be like, this is gonna be hard for me. let me do this, right? Because that's probably what I need. That's really rad. Um, so yeah, I know you primarily from a lot of your bodyweight training practices and barbell training, but on your website, over at devinkelley.co, you offer two programs at the moment: the handstand push-up program and the one-arm chin-up program.
Mm,
Both awesome. Why these two movements specifically? Out of any, there's so many movements that you could choose to
mm.
create a program on. Why these two?
Well, one answer is a bit more interesting. The other is basically just laziness. Um,
Let's go with
the
the
more,
interesting one.
yeah, the the interesting one is that I find that these two specific. I mean, it was a conscious choice to a certain extent. My hang up with offering online services or coaching was always that I didn't know the impact that it would have. I was always concerned about safety. I was always concerned about long-term impact. I was always concerned about accessibility and how the program would be interpreted by students. Because, when you think about something like a back squat, it seems pretty straightforward, right? If you're talking about barbell back squats, it's actually really not. And there are lots of things you can do to build up to about our barbell back squat, but a lot of people, especially adults in developed Western countries, have a hard time sitting down into a squat. And there's a lot that goes into developing the mobility and strength to be able to accomplish a barbell back squat with even just like 100 kilos on your back, which is a lot for most people. So you know so I chose the handstand push-up and one arm chin up because I feel like there are very accessible progressions to both of those movements that pretty much anybody can access at any point in their journey, or a very large number of people can access at any point in their journey. So I guess it was like, so that's number one, is like just the accessibility of these kind of movements and how easily they can be broken down into regressions. And then the other aspect is that they're such powerful movements and that they have a high transfer to other movements, which I've seen that you practice these as well. You've been through the developing your one arm chin up to 5 or more reps, right? So and your handstand push up is developing as well. So you can probably attest to the fact that these movements transfer really well to other strength skills, and they help to develop a lot of other attributes. So yeah, so that's the conscious part of it. The other part is that I've just not been putting as much time and effort into putting out more programs as I know that I could and should. So
Yeah, cool. So you started with these two because they're high, transferability through maybe to an overhead press or just vertical pulling in general. And you can start pretty much anywhere. That's something that we like to say on the live streams and stuff. Like, you can start this, just regress it to where you're at. And that's pretty cool. I like that. So wrapping back around to, that initial question, and I think you answered this a little bit. So we can maybe breeze by this one, but why do you train, right? And I think we kind of already touched on that, to start here.
Yeah, why I train. So I guess I'd have to answer that in two parts. First of all, like, I started in athletics just like most people start in athletics, kind of by accident. I just played sports growing up. That was it. And I played soccer when I was really young, from like 5 years old upward, and then played through high school as well. And I started running track in high school. So that's where my athletic background came from. My father was always a very active person. We did a lot of skiing. We did a lot of, he was a semi-pro soccer player as well. So we were a very active family as a family. Whenever we saw him once every 2 weeks. So like, at least when we were with him, we were very active. So yeah, first part was really just an accident. And then the second phase, I'd say, of my athletic journey after university, and I stopped running track competitively, was I started to find a new sort of that was when I started to find the existential layer to movement training. And I think that understanding that I wanted something like that came from my studies in philosophy. Because I studied philosophy and psychology and religions in undergraduate. So yeah, from that experience of diving into philosophy and seeing that there was this potential to learn in an existential way, and also in a corporeal way, that a corporal experience of moving your body, and whether it's dance or whether it's strength training or whether it's gymnastics or running or whatever it is, how you're moving, I found this opportunity to access a layer of learning that was really absent from most approaches to development. For example, in public education systems or university education, where you're just sitting down at a desk, listening to someone speak, writing, passively listening, actively engaging in conversation, but the whole thing happens while you're static, while you're here. And there's not that kind of interactive play that occurs with your body and different objects or stimulation, or an interaction between two people. So I found that layer of learning to be fascinating, and that's how I stumbled into yoga. And I thought, oh, this is a system where people have been thinking about this culturally for a very long time, how physical movement can inform our inward spiritual journey. It can inform our experience of what it's like to be human, and to introspect, and to confront our emotional states. And so I was fascinated with that, and I was like, okay, so there needs to, so that's when I started on that journey of like, okay, I want to develop a physical practice that helps me to become a better learner and to understand myself better.
Wow, that's really cool. I like that how you just finished there. A physical practice to become a better learner. And becoming a better learner, you can probably then learn that next thing, as you transfer to barbell training, or I'll ask you in a sec here what goals you have, but you can kind of take that to learn that next thing even maybe more efficiently, or learn that next thing without that same hiccup that you had in that previous experience, right? Which is pretty cool. So next here, what do you see as like one of the biggest misconceptions about training? Is there something out there that you see all the time and you're just like, no, no, like this is all, is there anything out there that you just see and feel that it's just a misconception about training?
I think the thing that weighs on my heart the most out of anything is when I see that the overwhelming majority of people, almost everybody, is training from a place of fear.
Mm.
And so for me, I think the biggest misconception or mistake that people make in their training is that, well, I mean, I'm talking about training here, but really I'm making a more general statement, because training, I think for most, in this case, for most people is a symptom of the way that they're living the rest of their lives. I feel like, I mean, you could contend this, I suppose, but I would argue that if you do contend this, you're probably just not paying close enough attention. Most people, when they train, are coming from a space of either trying to, they're in constant reaction to a belief that they're either bad or defective in some way.
Mm.
They are alone or isolated in some way, or without purpose, or they are unsafe in some way. Their environment or other people are a threat to them.
Mm.
And those three primary fears, I think, are what drive the majority of behavior for most people all of the time, never mind with training. And so the way I like to reframe training is that it's an opportunity to practice a reorientation, to notice the stories or the narratives that we hold on to and we carry throughout our lives that are coming from those three primary fear orientations, to notice when those are driving our training behavior, and shift the orientation, to notice those patterns and the consequences or result of those patterns, because they have real consequences in our lives when we come from those motives, and some of those consequences are pretty subtle, and so paying attention to those consequences, the subtle ways that those narratives play out in the flow of our lives, and then choosing to reorient to values. That's my puppy Pina.
Oh.
Our puppy, my girlfriend brought her over from Brazil.
Oh, beautiful.
She's a character. She's in trouble now because she just bit her mom. She didn't want to eat her dinner and she bit her mom. Anyway, so I think training is a great excuse to practice that reorientation. It's a really great medium, because the changes that we make in our training, we not only feel on an intellectual level, but we feel it on a physiological level. It really changes who we are in a very visceral way. And so I think that's the biggest misconception, is that people don't see training as just a symptom of the rest of their lives. They fail to see it as an opportunity to reorient to their highest values and free themselves from those fear patterns.
Yeah, that's really eye-opening. Do you think somebody could start there? Or like, to me it seems at least that most people might start training for aesthetic purposes, right? Or start
Mm-hmm.
training for some goal in mind. Maybe, yeah, whether it's in sports or if maybe they get into bodybuilding or something to look a certain way to maybe impress others or to impress themselves. But then after a while of training, maybe the goals shift of, you know what, I started that way, but now I'm actually liking the way I feel, like mentally or physically, or the confidence it now brings or something like that. And then eventually after maybe a couple years, you could really, like, you don't really care too much about how you look at all. It's maybe just, I feel really darn good like this and I want to keep it up. Is this something that you think someone could just start with the understanding right away? Or is it kind of like the natural process of things where maybe you'll start for maybe more like shallow, quote unquote, shallow reasons, or, different purposes. But as you delve in deeper, it's like, okay, there's actually more utility to this than I initially expected.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's a great point. I think one of the most remarkable things about humans is our ability to change the meaning of something. So we start out doing something in one way and it means something to us, and then it can completely change. And it shows you sort of the arbitrary character of experience. It is quite ambiguous. So though, I think it's hard to quantify. Also, I hear this argument in yoga a lot. You'll hear me disagree with a lot of the way that things are done in yoga culture, in its various expressions. But people say, oh yeah, well, if I hadn't found yoga, then maybe I wouldn't have, so on and so forth. I wouldn't have started the fitness journey, or I wouldn't have later on discovered strength training or better modalities, or I wouldn't have been introduced to introspective practice or meditation. It really saved my life. It's like, yeah, that's great. And it's not necessarily the case that you really needed that as a way in, as a door in. There might have been other doors. And also, it was your door. So that's just how it is, So, of course, things can change meaning, but it's really hard to quantify, how, what amount of people are actually introduced to these practices for the wrong reasons, and can those reasons be used as kind of like a fishing lure to bring people in? Can we bait people with aesthetics, and can we bait people with these kind of fear narratives that get them to, like, if you don't, then you're going to be a fat dad bod piece of crap, So you need to get on your game and buy my program, or you're going to be a fat failure. Sure, we can bait people with that, but it really is a game of like sort of godlike statistics that we don't have access to know whether or not we're playing a good game or not, and whether or not we're actually helping more people in the end than we're hurting. And of course, it is possible to start people on the journey from a good space of being oriented to their highest values, but unfortunately, that's not how most people are raised. They don't have that sort of grounded perspective. Nobody taught me. I don't know about you, Josh, but nobody taught me how to introspect when I was growing up. Nobody taught me how to observe my own fear reactions to things, or meditate, or, I had to figure that kind of stuff out when I was along the way when I was an adult.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me growing up, I had prayer always. And I think that for me served as that, maybe a bit different, but definitely no one taught me how to be introspective when I was 6. I mean, in that sense. So yeah, that's definitely pretty rad. So yeah, I guess moving on here, with body weight training in mind, what would be some of the core pieces of equipment you could not go without? So initially I was like, is there any kind of like training apparatus that is particularly, like maybe weird or interesting for you? But I guess the question being, if there was just like one piece of training equipment, maybe you're traveling or maybe you're training at home, what could that be? And assuming you already have your body, like you have your body weight.
Yeah, I like this question because I was looking forward to turning it on its head. I think probably the best thing about body weight training is that you don't need, you can do without all of the equipment. So there is the answer to that question is there is no piece of equipment that I think I couldn't do without.
I like that
There is no
answer.
piece of
That's
equipment
great.
that is essential. It's not essential. And, so if we're talking about, okay, you can get everything done with no equipment, no question. But the thing that becomes really challenging for a lot of people, if you don't have like a wall to grab onto the top of, or if you don't have a door that you can hang off of, or if there's really no place to hold anything, is pulling work. That's probably the most restricted form of movement. And it's probably also one of the most useful forms of movement. Development of the structures in the back with our pulling really helps to keep our posture in check. It really helps to balance our sort of pushing dominant patterns and just develop a more robust shoulder complex. So I think it's really important. So one of the things, I think probably the thing that has the most versatility that you could carry around with you, of course, is the gymnastics rings. It's going to open up not only pulling movements, but also pushing movements and different weird angles and stability practices. And there's so many things you can do with the gymnastics rings. It's almost limitless, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're gonna carry around something, sure, I'd say it's gymnastics rings. And then perhaps after that, probably some resistance bands, because you can hook them to almost anything. You can create these weird angles. You can improve exercises in different ways and make them novel. So yeah, I'd say, like, if you're just going to carry, if you've got your apocalypse backpack, I'd say, yeah, throw a set of gymnastics rings in there. Probably a water filter and some resistance bands.
A water filter. I like that. That's great. Yeah. So I guess I suppose that's along the lines of where I would go with that too. The body weight you can do so much with, but man, yeah, those rings, especially if you have nothing to hang on initially. Well, I guess you'd have to hang the rings on something, but a tree should work fine.
Yeah, that's the limit, right? Because if you don't have anything to hang on, then you probably won't have anything to hang the rings from either.
Right.
But like that's a nice solution, or that's a nice excuse to start to find creative solutions, because I started to have to look around for other ways to access my pulling patterns. So I would like get underneath like a dining room table, and like hold the sides of it like this and be doing rows on the dining room table, or,
right.
So you'll find ways, but yeah,
it's just whatever's in the reticular activator, right? Like since getting rings, I'll be out at like the mall or like downtown, and I'm like, oh, that's the perfect spot. Yeah. Like, that's the perfect spot for rings. Like if I come back, that like, it'd be great. But when you're not like thinking about that, right, and it's not in your conscious, it's not something that you even look for. But yeah, once you get a pair, it's like, okay, I could hang them here, I could hang them here, I could hang them here. So there's places.
You should add that as a criteria on Airbnb, huh?
Yeah. Is there a place
a place to hang rings?
Absolutely. That'd be amazing. Yeah, no, we get that excuse or reasoning, I guess, a lot of like, well, I have nowhere to hang them. And I'm like, well, as long as there's a tree or a place to play basketball near you or something, there's probably a place to hang rings, which is pretty rad. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit at the start, and I said I knew your answer. And this is, what is your perspective on creatine, monohydrate, caffeine, supplements in general? I do want to start with caffeine and creatine, though, because these seem to be widely used. What is your perspective on these two in particular, and then supplements in general, maybe after that?
Yeah, caffeine is complicated because people have such an individual reaction to it, and like it's been shown, for example, in a lot of sleep research, that sleep science research, that people process caffeine at different rates, for example. So the half-life is different from individual to individual. So if you're one of these people that processes caffeine very slowly, well, probably drinking a coffee at noon is going to wreck your sleep. But if you're one of the people who processes it quickly, then probably it's going to be no issue. So there's a lot of individual factors to consider. For myself personally, I'm kind of a purist, so I don't even drink tea. I don't drink any kind of caffeine because I notice that even if I have it in the morning, it does kind of affect my sleep. And I also just don't like the feeling of being on a substance that changes my state of consciousness in a way. And I get this caffeine kind of gives me this, I don't know how to say, there's not really words for the feeling, but anybody who's had like a cup of coffee that was a little bit too strong, you know the feeling. And I'm very sensitive to that, to any kind of feeling that changes the way my body, any substance that changes the way my body feels.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me personally, for my own body, I'm very much a purist. I don't take any kind of like over-the-counter pain medication. When I get my tooth pulled or anything, I just let myself deal with the pain. I don't take any kind. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not advocating that people try to play the hero here. You know, make your own choices with your pain and your whatever you're going through. But that's just my experience. So anyway, with caffeine, I find that the biggest problem with it is that it does interfere with sleep. And even if you take it like I think I don't want to miscite the information here, but I think it has like what is it, like a 12-hour quarter life? So even if you drink it at 9 a.m., that means that at 9 p.m., there's still going to be a quarter of that caffeine that you drank active in your system for the average person, which is significant, which means like drinking a quarter a cup of coffee right before you go to bed. Maybe not the smartest idea for sleep. And for athletes or for people who are trying to train and gain strength, or even if you're not athletes, sleep is central. And if you're doing something that's disrupting the quality of your sleep, that can easily be removed. I mean, yeah, I don't know. And there's also like psychological things that people have an attachment to drinking their morning cup of Joe, and they like that as a routine, and it helps them to get oriented toward the day, helps them to focus as a meditation, or like, and they like the smell of it. It's associated with good memories. I don't think it's necessary to take that away from people, but I would ask them to sort of question, like, are there other ways that you can find that? Are there other ways that you can find those valuable aspects that can help give you those same things, but without the negative effect? Caffeine has a temporary vasoconstriction effect, but then after a certain point, it's a vasodilator. So it's been shown with increased energy output as well. It's been shown to be a performance enhancer. So I think it's also good for people who want to do strength training or some kind of athletics as a performance enhancer. But then once again, if you're an athlete or you're looking for optimal performance, then sleep is your number one. You want to be able to recover from your efforts. So it's like balancing that. Yeah. So that's caffeine.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything before I jump on?
Yeah. So, I mean, I like the purist mind set. Like, I personally don't, drink or do any smoke weed or do any drugs or anything like that. I'm in the same reasoning that you said, is I don't want to alter my mind state at all, right? I don't necessarily like how I feel if I'm drunk or if I'm high or if I'm, anything like that. I like to just feel sober and feel good and feel great. Like, why would I want to alter anything? Seems to be going just fine. I've never really thought of that for caffeine, right? So that's definitely pretty eye-opening of like, okay, this is also altering my state. I guess the so Shannon actually about like 6 months ago had the idea of like, let's try to do no caffeine for a week or whatever. And so we got off, and like the first week was like headaches galore and not super enjoyable, I guess, because I was used to quite a bit. Now it's been about 6 months with none, and definitely feeling pretty nice. It's nice having just flatlined energy, not up and down, and sleep and stuff like that. Although I don't know if I struggled too much with this sleep, and some of the research that you do talk about performance enhancers and then cognitive enhancement too, does make me feel, well, if somebody is, an elite athlete or performing at the highest level, maybe getting some extra bang for their buck. But I guess it depends on sleep quality, like you said, because if they're having better training, but then having a more difficult time recovering with sleep, might be a net negative overall. And a lot of people might experience that. Of course, if you can sleep and get the caffeine and you don't necessarily care about altering your state, then maybe there's a place.
Yeah. Also, like you bring up another good point, which is like, I feel like a lot of people are using caffeine as a way to chemically manipulate their energy levels during the day. Like you notice that there's a spike and a lull,
Yeah.
and so I think another question from an existential perspective, it's like, what are you seeking here? Why are you relying on this external artifice in order to manipulate your experience? Where is that coming from? And is that a way? Is there something you can learn by questioning your reliance on the extrinsic artifice? You know?
Right. Why is there this desire or need to show up or perform? I guess it maybe comes down to wanting to survive, right? I mean, at a very primal level, to impress others and survive and show up your best. Yeah, creatine. No.
Well, like I say, yeah. So anyway, forget about that stuff. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Yeah, with the man behind the curtain is fear, of course. And,
right.
You know, like I said before, I feel like most people's behavior most of the time is driven by a fear of either being bad, not safe, or alone. And so if we're looking at why people use extrinsic artifices, external artifices like caffeine to manipulate the way they feel, is usually because they're running from something. They're running from a fear of, maybe they perceive some threat, or they perceive some defect in themselves, or they perceive some threat of isolation or being alone, and they think that this is a way to come back. They think that something is wrong and that they need to correct that. And so it's very similar. I dealt with obsessive compulsive disorder when I was younger, and so I got very acquainted with the fear aspect of that disorder. And you know, when you're obsessed with something and compelled to take an action that is oriented around a feeling like something is wrong if I don't do this, you know, it doesn't make any sense at all to somebody else. It's like, why did I have to walk back 100 meters to touch that fire hydrant that I passed before? Or else I felt like my world was going to collapse around me if I didn't. Well, it's a subtle trigger in the mind where we just decide that something is wrong and we need to fix it. And usually whatever is wrong is associated with a fear of not being safe, being alone, or being defective in some way. And we're trying to mitigate that, the risk of that being true.
Wow. Yeah. That's cool that a lot of this stuff can wrap back down to those three basic fears, you know, like, yeah, just like those primary motivators for action. Right. That's cool, man. So
creatine.
Yeah, creatine. Yeah, that's next. Yeah, so that's caffeine and that's caffeine. So creatine and then other supplements. I don't know if you wanted to touch on anything else, but yeah.
Yeah, I can say some general things about other supplements, but I'll keep it short. But the creatine thing is it's interesting because creatine is probably the most well-researched like performance enhancing supplement out there.
Yeah.
And the research is pretty clear at this point that it is very beneficial. It has no side effects, more or less, though I'll get into that in a second. And so there's almost no downside and almost all upside.
Right.
So, I mean, I'd say if you're a strength athlete and you're thinking about improving your performance, or if you're not eating a lot of red meat, for example, or not a lot of meat in general or animal products, it's a great idea to supplement creatine, I'd say. But, you know, if you are already eating a lot of red meat or a lot of meat in general, I'd say that probably you don't even really need it. You're probably getting as much, I don't know. People have a different idea of what a lot means. So of course I'm risking people misunderstanding this. So you'd have to do your own research as to like, what is enough meat to get enough creatine, you know?
I think it would be quite a bit, right? Because I mean, you get a little bit from like, say, a steak, but I think to get 5 grams worth or even 2.5 grams worth, I think it would be.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, 5 grams is overkill, you know, for sure. Like we don't really need that much, but it doesn't hurt to take that much, and it definitely is enough to maintain your creatine levels. So, you know, I take 5 grams a day in the morning, but this is where like I'll get to my this is where I'll get to my caveat here about side effects. So when I started taking creatine, one of the things I noticed was that because I was doing almost exclusively body weight training at that time, I was in China training on my rooftop, didn't really have, for upper body, I was doing almost all body weight stuff. And so I was working on my one arm chin up pretty heavily at the time. And I noticed that when I went through the creatine loading phase, so I was taking more like 15 a day for that initial week or so. I noticed that I started to retain a lot more water, and the water that you'll retain when you're really loaded up on creatine is significant. It's kilos of weight, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's multiple kilos of weight potentially. So, so my point is like that really impacts body weight skills. If I suddenly now I have, 1 to 2 or even 3 extra kilos of body weight on me from water retention, well, I mean, that's going to make an enormous difference in a movement like a one arm chin up. So I noticed that I was feeling really heavy, and I didn't really know what it was attributed to at the time, but it really affected my mindset. And because I kind of went backwards in progress, and I thought, well, but anyway, so I think, so it was, if body weight skills were exclusively my goal, if I wanted to be as strong and as light as possible to maximize my relative strength ratio,
Yep.
then I don't think I would even take creatine, to be honest. I don't think I would. Although based on the research, it's almost all positive. So, there's an example of someone who, probably doesn't need to take creatine. If you're eating enough meat, and if your goal is like body weight strength and you want to stay light, or so say, for example, you're a climber or a gymnast, where throwing your body weight around and moving it in space is really important, or a circus athlete, an acrobat, I would say that maybe you don't want those extra kilos of body weight. I don't know. So
Yeah, so I guess it's just an individual answer once again, but I think on this one, it seems as, for most modalities of training, having more strength capacity, more capacity for muscle development, hypertrophy, it seems generally pretty rock solid.
good.
Yeah. And then and then is there any other supplements that you see kind of around here or there that pique your interest, or is creatine kind of maybe that one that you're like, okay, this is well researched enough, it doesn't necessarily alter consciousness in any way, this is just something that might just purely benefit my training? Is there anything else like that, or is this kind of the one that piques your interest the most?
I'd say aside from that, in terms of positive things that you could probably take, I say magnesium is probably pretty uncontroversial.
Mm-hmm.
I say if you get magnesium in the right form, I would even say, like, before, maybe years ago, I would have said take magnesium with zinc, but there's some evidence that taking zinc as a supplement can potentially have some negative side effects as well. And taking it regularly can affect our copper, for example. And that's something, like, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm also not a biochemist. So I can't really in good conscience recommend anything to anybody per se, but I take magnesium regularly at night. And I also took zinc for a long time, didn't really see any negative side effects per se, but again, I don't know. So these basic kind of vitamin supplementations, I'd say also you want to be careful where you get your liquid minerals from and make sure they're from a good source and don't overdose on them. But liquid minerals might be a good idea as well. But for the most part, you'll notice that I'm not mentioning really like a lot of powdered supplementation. The problem with like getting prepackaged supplements is that somebody's out to make a profit from that at every stage in the processing. So whether it's packaging or whether it's, including bulking agents or emulsifiers or sweeteners or, whatever, they're either cutting the quality of the ingredients that are going in, or they're making it appear like there's more product than there is. And so you're either losing money or you're getting screwed on the ingredient quality. Like, for example, they'll sneak in things like soy lecithin, or they'll sneak in things like carrageenan and other emulsification agents and artificial sweeteners. And we don't, I don't know. I just don't, I I can't convince myself that any of those have a good effect in the body. You know, they'll also put a lot of seed oils and I don't know, you know, they want to make a profit on these things. So I'd say like in general, in terms of supplements, I mean, we're talking about things like magnesium, creatine, maybe a little bit of pure whey protein isolate, which has no other ingredients, not even lecithin, you know, just like the only ingredient on the list is like whey protein isolate
Right.
or egg white protein isolate. Yeah, sure, okay, go with those if you want to, but a lot of people are asking questions about supplementations who they really shouldn't be asking questions about supplements. You know, they need to
Yeah.
get there. You know, don't say this out loud to them at a party. You want to pull them to the side and say this, but like, hey, you shouldn't be asking questions about supplementation because your diet's not on point, you know, like you need
Amen.
to get eating whole foods, you know, like,
Yeah. I was reading something last night and it was like, talking about majoring in the minors, right? And it's this idea of like supplementation in this regard can maybe, you know, be the icing on top to squeeze out some extra, you know, 1%, you know, gains in these areas, or maybe even a couple percent if we're talking about creatine. But by and large, it's going to come down to, you know, the adaptation is going to come down to, you know, progressive overload. Are you adding weight over time? Are you getting enough quality sleep? Are you getting adequate protein? Are you getting adequate calories? You know, are you seeing sunlight? Are these basic things in place or aren't they? And yeah, I like your perspective on that. It's like, don't be asking about the supplementation before the basics are the foundation is laid, and that's kind of who asks about supplements a lot. Like one of the first questions that people like new gym goers might, you know, think about is, okay, well, what supplements do I get on? It's like, well, that, I mean, let's get everything else dialed in first. You know, this is the last thing that we might want to look at to really maximize things. But
they're
yeah,
like, yeah, well, I don't really like drinking water per se. I really only like drinking sports drinks, but what brand of creatine should I buy? You know, it's like, well,
yeah. I actually saw an advertisement last night, maybe on Instagram or YouTube or something, and it's like, don't like the taste of water, and then they just like pour this pack of like, you know, probably artificial sweeteners, and they're like, we're like, fix the water by pouring this into it. I'm just like, oh no. maybe there's something anyway, maybe there's something wrong if you don't like the taste of water.
There's a large population out there, unfortunately, that is like that. You know, you meet people in their adulthood that are like, I don't like the taste of water. Oh no. Okay, well,
yeah, well,
maybe I'm not the guy for those people right now, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Just to give a bit of empathy, I guess, like we're accustomed to what we're accustomed to in a way, right? Like if we're used to drinking milk, you know, it might taste good, but if you're used to drinking water, or maybe a better example is if you think you're about to drink a glass of water and you drink milk, it's like just not what your body was used to or expecting. In the same way, if you're used to drinking diet soda, diet soda, and you drink a regular soda, the regular soda might taste crazy, like way too sweet. This is ridiculous, right? But if you drink a diet soda and you're used to regular soda, you might think, oh, this tastes like you know, trash, or you know, whatever. I don't know if you're familiar with that example if you don't drink soda in general.
Well, the other problem too, Josh, is that it's not only that, but the water that people are drinking on average is very mineral poor, and it also has other things in it, like, you know, chlorine and fluoride, and, you know, stuff that probably alters the taste of the water, and as well as other treatment chemicals in there. And so probably if you're drinking tap water or even filtered tap water, it might not taste that great to you. And it's also mineral poor, so your body doesn't really have any reason to like the taste of it either. But I guarantee you that if you have a sip of like fresh mineral water, like really from like, I don't know, like a stream or something that you put through a filter, of course, so you don't get a parasite, but yeah, like when you're thirsty, my God, you know, it's a human thing. It's not a matter of personal taste at that point. But unfortunately, people's water quality is pretty poor.
Yeah.
As well, and that's a hard problem to solve.
We were having that discussion, funny enough, on stream last night. I stream, you know, WoW into a worldwide audience, and a lot of people in Europe, I guess, were saying like, maybe it's not as much of a problem. They're like, US, people that live in the US always talk about water filters. Like, people would look at you weird if you asked here. So I don't know if maybe in different parts of the world, if that's more or less of an issue. I know for Arizona specifically, in where I live in Tucson, Arizona, the water quality, like drinking it from the tap, I mean, no one drinks it from the tap. The water quality is pretty poor. So yeah, going through some type of filtration system is recommended to say the least.
Sure.
But maybe elsewhere for listeners, I mean, it depends on your water source, whether you're getting it from a well, whether you're getting it from, the city or, whatever.
Yeah. If you got an artesian well, you're hooked up, man. That's what's up.
My aunt's house is on a well, just well water. And I'm not sure what type of well, but it's incredible. It's just so good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, I guess moving on, we had a long discussion on that. What is your perspective on being a generalist versus being a specialist? And why do you gravitate towards one or the other?
Yeah, like that's a big discussion kind of in the movement community, and Ido also made that a big thing, of course. Ido Portal, if you're not familiar with him, but yeah, so like I don't tend to get hung up on that discussion so much. Like like I mentioned at the beginning, for me, physical practice is more so a means of experimentation and learning, and I don't like to nitpick about like what's the more transferable exercise. Everything has a transferability to some extent, and everything is going to teach you something to some extent, and people find value in different things. People have weird hobbies that are pretty awesome,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't like to rob people of that. I would rather just have them find some, because what you like doing is also what you're going to gravitate toward doing most of the time, so, or at least be able to stay more consistent with it. So I'd say, like, in terms of being a specialist or a generalist, it's going to strike different people's fancy. Like I'm a generalist. I like to hop from between different disciplines and explore different things, but there are also some things that I choose not to explore. So does that make me a specialist? I don't know. That I have no interest in Olympic weightlifting, that I have no interest in parkour, really. I have some interest, but or I don't know. There are lots of things that I don't do, or bobsledding, or I don't know. So yeah, like I would say, whether you want to be a specialist or a generalist, or there are obviously advantages and disadvantages to both. I'd say the more important thing that people could take away from what I'm offering as myself and as a coach is that whatever the practice is, it just can be used to enrich your life. It can be used as an existential practice. Instead of as something to, like, because that's the thing, man. Like, I feel like a lot of people are using that discussion, like specialist versus generalist. I feel like they're trying to figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing to figure out, guys. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing that we're going to die, that's it. So, I mean, how do you want to do it? That's the thing.
Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. Like, so I guess this kind of like, skip my mind a bit, but if you're not familiar, generalist versus specialist would be focusing on one specific area of movement, or just in general, as the word suggests. Generalist in a training form might, like Devin said, is hop between many different disciplines. And a lot of the times the discussion is, well, if I'm a specialist, I can get really, really good at this one thing because I'm practicing this one thing for a very long time. And if you ever want to be at like an Olympic level at something, you probably should be specialized in that thing. Versus a generalist, there's like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of a thing, where you can hop between these things, but maybe you'll never get incredibly like world class at something, but you can experience a lot of different things. So the question kind of was, the difference between the two, and you're like, it's not even a conversation that a lot of people have, but it's not something that really interests me. Like, you do you, and whether it's generalist or specialist, it's all still falls under the same umbrella of training, learning more about yourself, and experiencing in the way that maybe you find most interesting.
Well, I'd add there as well that like the reason I say that is because I feel like this discussion happens under that umbrella of trying to get it right,
Hmm.
trying to figure it out.
I
But under a
see.
different umbrella, the discussion starts to make a little bit more sense, which is basically the discussion of what you have a resistance to. Like I said, like when I moved to China, the purpose was to push my buttons and to explore blind spots, to find find new ways of experiencing life, to look for new insights. And I think so if, for example, you're a specialist and you have a fear of exploring other disciplines for some particular reason, there may be some existential value for you in going to explore those other disciplines. You may learn something that will change your life.
Right.
Whereas if you're a specialist or sorry, if you're a generalist and you have a fear of specializing or going deep into one thing, you're probably also limiting your insights. You're probably also limiting your potential. So I don't know. I'd say, if you're trying to answer that question for yourself, just look at where your resistance is. Look at where you're running from, and
Hmm.
perhaps and try to confront some of those areas. That's all.
Yeah, cool. I think I think maybe I'm just guessing here, but for someone like you, following you on social media for a few years, it seems as if you'll take something, specialize it, so to speak, for maybe 6 months or a year, 2 years, and really focus on that
Hmm.
one thing, and then once, I don't know if there's like a moment that clicks and you're like, okay, I got out of that what I wanted, or I learned what I wanted, or if maybe there's not a moment like that, but something else maybe will be like, okay, it's time to then move on. Is there a specific moment of time when that happens? Like with yoga, I'm not sure if you actively practice anymore, but maybe I'm guessing not as much as previously, right? So yeah, was there a moment where you're like, okay, it's time to maybe now focus more on bodyweight training after training with bodyweight? Okay, now maybe it's time to focus on barbell training. How did this progression kind of occur, and was there a moment of like, okay, I think I've done what I've sought out to do. Let me
Mm.
explore in a new area.
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately, it's probably a bit too complicated to answer fully here. But just to give a couple of things, it's probably a push pull, and there's multiple push pulls on each side. And one of the pulls, or in other words, like what's bringing me forward into a new discipline or a new area of study, is just interest. I just get curious.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, that looks really fascinating, or it's more of an intuitive thing. Sometimes it's rational, like for example, my interest in back squats. I recognize that they're probably one of the most beneficial lifts in terms of transferability and overall strength development. It's just a great movement and mobility as well. So there's some more rational decisions there, but otherwise, mostly I just kind of follow what seems to be of interest to me and what seems reasonable in terms of risk as well, because some practices are obviously quite risky. I'm not really interested in doing things that pose a risk to me that would compromise my ability to keep training.
Hmm.
um, so yeah, so that would be a pull, sorry, that would be a push, for example, something that's pushing me away from a discipline or preventing me from ever going there at all would be when I make an assessment and I say, the risk here is not worth it. And so, for example, one arm handstand was one of those practices where I kept moving toward one arm handstand, got really close, was getting up to like, really long one finger holds and really long sort of like touch and goes on one hand.
Yep.
And, and, eventually I started to realize that it was very, uh, what do you call it? Um, it's deeply connected with my tendency to get shoulder injuries.
Mm.
So, with the risk of shoulder injury together with the high level of specificity and specialization in one arm handstands, how little they transfer to other skills. Um, yeah, I started to realize, oh, maybe this is not something that I want to put a lot of time into. Well, I recognize that some people want to explore it as an art form or as a personal existential practice or whatever their reasons. There are valid reasons for wanting to do it. I just found that all factors balanced together, maybe not the practice that I want to put a lot of time into personally. And so, yeah, I kind of like, I would say that these push-pull factors on both sides kind of amalgamate and form a, a soup of an intuition that brings me in or out of a particular practice. But it's not the same for every discipline. My reasons for leaving or coming into those disciplines are different, you know?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, I keep hearing you say it's just something that didn't pique my interest as much, or something that I didn't require. But for someone else, that one arm handstand might be it, right? Like it's an 8-year journey that like they're just obsessed over this one thing, even with no skill transfer at all. And I'm similar to you with the one arm handstand, with the one finger holds for 5 or 10 seconds, maybe some touch and goes. But, maybe I'll train it more in the future. But it's something that over the last 6 months, I haven't really put any time into, and have developed strength practices like the one arm pull up with the handstand push up or something. And I mean, who's to say it's necessarily better, but it is nice that the skill transfers, and there's other things that I'm getting from it besides the skill in itself. I know we are running. Yeah.
I'd say that shouldn't be undercounted as well. If over time, over the years, if you experience this, like, hey, this thing isn't paying me back as much, or if I just focus on handstand push-up, I can also maintain my handstand pretty well, and I feel that I can train more consistently, and it has less negative side effects, and all that stuff. That accumulated experience,
That's real,
like,
yeah.
It's real for sure, and you shouldn't discount that. So. Did you notice we're wearing the same shirt, by the way? The same exact color.
Same, the charcoal, man, the charcoal.
Yep. That's where it's at. Charcoal t-shirts.
That's right. I know we are running short on time, so I mean, for these next couple, we can, if we just want to do something quick, but I was wondering.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, rapid fire time. Let's do it, man. So in terms of injury prevention, do you incorporate this with your training, with your programming? And if so, kind of how does that look like? But once again, just, as quick as you can.
Yeah, really short answer.
Sure.
People overthink it. Just train smarter.
Okay.
Yeah, most injuries come from training. Most injuries, if you're talking about injury prevention, most injuries in training come from changing too many variables, or one or more variables too quickly.
Okay.
So changing volume, intensity, frequency, or quality in some way, technique, for example, and you change it all of a sudden, or you change 2 variables at one time, or you change them a lot. You change the variables by a lot. And that's when you see people get injured. So gradual changes make more rational decisions in terms of adjusting those variables. Don't do it too much. Small increments, if you can, control one single variable at a time, and then you'll know what's causing what as well. You'll be able to take better notes.
Awesome. I love that. I'm probably going to botch this, but I was reading a study about injuries a couple of years ago, so it's been a while, but the people with the least injuries were the people that didn't change what they were doing across all disciplines. So if you were a surfer for 50 years, or if you were a climber for 50 years, if you were a gymnast or for 50 years, whatever it was, if you were doing it for long enough and you weren't bouncing all over the place, your body adapts to what it's required to do. And, if I tried to maybe go surf after my whole life not surfing, I might, hurt myself in some capacity. Not saying I shouldn't, but just keeping that in mind in terms of injury prevention, that doing what you're doing is probably your body's adapted to do it quite well, right? So yeah, that's cool. And if you do move, those slow adaptations, I love it. So yeah, on your Instagram, I've seen you do things like the splits, or touch your forehead, your toe to your forehead, which is awesome. Demonstrate full range of motion through like a squat, handstand push-up. In general, I've seen you have some pretty awesome mobility feats. What have you discovered to be a key element in that, and unlocking mobility, whatever, whether it's the hamstring or the shoulder? Is there something that has really stood out for you?
Yeah, I don't think, like, in terms of does everybody need to do all of their exercises in a full range of motion all the time? I say, no, it's not really that essential. Though I'd say the main thing to keep in mind with mobility training, what I've learned in my practice over the years, it's really simple, actually. if you don't develop the capacity to generate force in a range of motion, so in other words, if you don't build strength in a particular part of a range of motion, you won't have it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So if, for example, you're working on passive flexibility, you can get your toe all the way up to your head. Okay, that's cool. But that just refers to the capacity of the joint to move into that range. It doesn't talk about the ability to generate force in that particular range. And so now when we're talking about the nervous system's perception of pain and risk of tissue damage, what it perceives as potential tissue damage, when you move into that range under load, your nervous system might perceive that as a threat, the potential of potential tissue damage. And then the way it communicates your nervous system doesn't speak English, of course, it speaks pain. So
speaks pain, yeah.
So it'll communicate in terms of sensation, in terms of pain. And if it sees the potential risk of tissue damage, then it's going to continue to communicate that pain until you develop capacity in that area. So a lot of people are thinking about like, how do I get rid of this pain? And they're thinking, oh, I need to loosen up the area. I need to loosen it up. I need to relax the area. Well, sometimes that might be the case. For example, with muscle spasm, it's not usually the case in terms of chronic pain. Chronic pain is usually a symptom that your nervous system doesn't feel you have the capacity to generate force in that particular range or area. Not always, of course, I'm generalizing, but so you need to develop the tissue in that area, and you need to develop your nervous system's capacity to generate force. So, in that sense, mobility is really simple, and people try to overcomplicate it, but it's, it doesn't need to be.
Cool. Awesome. That's great. What is your general approach to nutrition? And I understand, one, you're not a nutritionist like you mentioned, but two, this is a topic we could talk hours about, right? So, in like, if you could give just some stranger on the street, they're like clearly struggling with nutrition. They're like, man, like what, like just a couple like basic things that I could maybe be having my awareness in terms of making more conscious choices, practical conscious choices. Maybe what would that be?
That is tough to answer generally without being irresponsible,
Right.
I'd say that really simple nutrition advice. I mean, try to eat foods with one ingredient. You've probably heard me say this before.
Yep.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest one, Okay. I mean, there are lots of, try to eat foods with one ingredient. Just take out packaged stuff, anything that's been processed or put together with other foods. I mean, obviously they can be delicious at times, and some of them are clean, some of them are perfectly fine. But for the most part, as a rule, I think everybody would benefit from that, just sticking to things where they know what is in it. Cook more at home, for example, because then what's going into your food. Develop some cooking skills. That's a great nutrition advice that people don't give out a lot. They're like, what do I eat? What do I eat? What do I eat? No, learn to cook. Learn to cook for yourself. Develop some basic cooking skills. Get excited about the ingredients that you're using. I look at your page, for example, on Instagram, and you're always, when you talk about the ingredients that you're putting into stuff, and you do your grocery hauls that you bring home, you're excited. You're like, I can't wait to try this, and this is going to be good together with that. And people would do so well to evolve their joy in regard to the ingredients that are going into their food. And then the second thing, which is going to be more controversial, I think, and a lot of people don't want to hear this right now because plant-based diets are such a big trend. Most people are overeating carbohydrates, undereating meat. I'm sorry, but there's no more nutritious food on the planet than red meat and organ meat.
Yeah,
it's bioavailable. It's bioavailable nutrients. I'll be the bad guy. I don't give it. I don't care.
I was the bad guy on my stream last night. Someone asked about that, and I think there might have been people that didn't even eat watching, but I said the same thing of like, dude, red meat is awesome, man. I mean, we do liver, beef liver, and just grass-fed beef a lot. And it's tasty, but two, nutritious, man. Vitamin density, nutrition density. Yeah, it's great.
It's also about the bioavailability of those nutrients as well. It's not about like, that's one thing that people don't really grasp very well. Again, I'm not a biochemist, not a nutritionist. I'm just giving you basics here. For example, with iron, there's different forms of iron. And so, for example, you're dealing with somebody with anemia and you say, eat more spinach. Yeah, cool. Technically, spinach has iron. Dark green leafy vegetables have iron, true, but it's non-heme iron, which is it's a fraction as bioavailable as heme iron, which can be found in most abundantly in red meat. So you look at the different kinds of the different chemical structures of nutrients that we absorb. They're not the same, and so we're talking about we're talking about the presence of nutrients is different than talking about the bioavailability of those nutrients and how much we actually get from those foods. And so I would say that, yeah, meats, organ meats, and raw dairy are the most nutrient dense bioavailable foods that you can eat. And people don't want to say this because it's not politically correct anymore, but I mean, whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you said that because I do think it's what people need to hear. Awesome. That's nutrition in 4 minutes. What training advice would you have given to your younger self? And I think we touched on this one just a little bit, but to get
right.
Yeah, to be less focused on the number itself and allow yourself to explore and learn and have that process. If you want to maybe say that better than I did, but
yeah, I mean that was the primary point, is that whatever you're doing is going to be more valuable as an existential practice than it is as a finite goal oriented practice. An existential practice, I mean, if you talk about like the guy's name is slipping my mind now. He talks about infinite versus finite games.
Is it Simon Sinek? No.
Simon talks about it, but it's in reference to somebody else's work, though. I can't remember the guy's name. I'm sorry about that. And he deserves credit, so definitely look him up. Infinite versus finite games. You'll find who it's attributed to. But the existential physical practice game is an infinite game. So we're trying to learn something about ourselves, learn something about the process of development, learn something about what it feels like to be you, and what kind of inputs, what kind of buttons we can push to change that. That's a very interesting infinite practice. And although finite goals are not purposeless, of course they're useful to have around, and you can hold them lightly in your hands, and we need them to a certain extent. To make them the end in themselves, I think, is misguided.
Right.
That's the primary point. So that's the advice I would give to myself. I'd say, like, focus on an infinite game. Pay attention to your experience.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I like when, like, you have a finite goal, and finite means like there's an end, right, in that goal, and then you achieve it. Then where do you go, right? Versus, like a lot of the times I think you see this in I don't want to pick on anyone specific, but you might see it in someone who does an elite level sport, right? They whether it's collegiate or even Olympians, and they might hit that goal, and then they got the gold, and then it's the rest of their life it's flatlined. There's nothing else to do. So then it's the nutrition falls off, the training everything falls apart, right? That goal was achieved, and everything else is gone now. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but we do see it from time to time, and it's something to keep in mind. With, I want to get really in shape to be on the beach this summer. You get really in shape on the beach, and then after the summer's over, you fall back out of shape, right? So maybe the danger of having something that so like a goal that is just so finite.
The finite goal there is also, like, on a deeper level. You say, I want to get in shape to look good on the beach. Actually, the finite goal is to be liked, right? To be accepted, to be found attractive. And so once you get that, then what?
Right. Exactly. Then what?
What's the point? I mean, like, yeah. So, I mean, that will open, again, if you use that finite goal as a means to an end and not as the end in itself, that can open up other opportunities. Of course, when you're attractive, when you have a good, clean, white smile, when you are, when you have a good posture, when you have a muscular physique, or when you are well spoken, all of these things are finite goals, right? You can achieve them in a finite sense, but they will open up doors for you as well. They will open up more social interactions. They'll open up business opportunities for you. They'll open up, so, but then there has to be some kind of deeper path, some deeper purpose there. And you can use those finite goals to get there. The problem is most people are confusing them.
Right.
They think that they're ends in themselves.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So what's next for you? So like we've talked about extensively here, you've ran, you've done yoga, bodyweight training, barbell training, all of these things. Is there anything on the horizon for you? Is there anything unitched that you're like maybe thinking about? I know I saw you training BJJ a year ago, or currently 6 months ago. Is there something that you're like, something on the horizon that you're going to leap to next, or is something more of like a bedrock, of a home, a foundation that you plan to stay for a while?
Well, you kind of ruined the surprise there, I guess, because BJJ is, martial arts, I'd say, is probably the next step for me.
Okay.
So striking sports, like Thai boxing, Western boxing, jiu-jitsu, Western wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling. Like, for me, these are very interesting to me, and I find them to be highly transferable and applicable. I like that they're very practical as well. They have practical application. And so, though I've been dealing with those of your listeners who know me will know that I've been dealing with a long-term brachioradialis injury that came from BJJ. Actually, it came from wrestling. That's not fair. That's prevented me from being very consistent with it, but I really love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I want to get back to it. I find it very practical. It's fascinating. And, for sure, like, I can imagine myself going through a period where I do almost nothing, of course, like maintenance strength training and stuff, but I can imagine myself in a time where I would be almost doing nothing but that for years, for 2-3 years, just focused on that, seeing if I can really go deep into the study. So I'd say martial arts. The other thing is writing, actually. So while I do have a lot of experience and practice in writing, I've never really gone through a period in my life where I actually made it a very specific practice, like I do with my strength training or other things. So, being in a space, an environment like a house, for example, that's in a very kind of bucolic setting, where I can designate a certain amount of time every day and a very intentional mindset and practice around improving my skill in writing a book, writing another book. For example, I'm already writing a book on narrative excavation. But so I think those two things, martial arts and writing as practices, because writing isn't exactly a movement practice, not physical anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you included that, because it seems as if, at least in your mind, that they're all on the same. Practicing is practicing, whether it's writing or whether it's BJJ or strength training, which is a pretty cool kind of way to wrap this up. I do think also there's a big difference, like you said, between writing in your spare time and writing in a way that you're giving your full attention to. Like I can relate with live streaming. When I was in college trying to be a live streamer or to be a professional gamer, I, trying to mix the two, didn't really give it its full attention and energy necessary for me to be able to actually excel at that thing. As soon as I graduated college, I'm like, cool, I can actually put this as my primary focus instead of some secondary thing that I'm also working on. And I mean, similarly now with this YouTube channel and this audience of like, cool, for the first time, I can actually make this more of a primary goal instead of something that I just do on the side. So yeah, I'm excited for where that goes with the BJJ writing and for the rest of this. But Devin, thank you so much for the chat, the conversation, for your time, and for being here. This is awesome.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And where can everyone find you for people listening? I'll have links down below as well.
Yeah, the easiest places are obviously my Instagram, which is Devin P. Kelley.
Great.
DEVIN PKELLEY. And then the other place is my website, which is same spelling, devinpkelly.co, not .com. .com was taken. So devinpkelly.co.
Great. That's perfect. Well, thank you again. And if you enjoyed the video, guys, thumbs up, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.